failure. A manifesto for masochism. 1. Undoing the binary is not the undoing of a system. It is an undoing of the self, because we are the system. Failing gender is to fail the system, to fail yourself complete. Failing gender is the masochistic act of undoing yourself the system. A masochistic undoing is the ideal. 2. Feminism is necessary because gender is the failure of privilege. Failing gender is to fail privilege, which is the ideal. So therefore, failing gender is failing feminism, which is to fail the system complete. Without gender, there would be no need for feminism. Failing feminism is a masochistic undoing, and so failing feminism is the ideal. 3. Gender is a power system in the same way money is a power system. Gender is real in the sense that money is real, in the sense that a bank is real. Gender is real in the sense that money can fail and a bank can fail, like gender can fail. Calling gender unreal is to make it resistant to failure. Gender is money and we're all in debt. 4. Gender is the commodification of desire, and so failing a debt is failing desire. Failing gender is to fail desire, because failing gender is being desire itself. Doing gender is commodity fetish. Masochism is seen as the failing of desire when masochism is being nothing but desire itself. When you fail desire, society thinks you owe them a debt. Failing the debt is to fail desire over and over and over. Commodification failure. 5. Without language, we wouldn't have gender. Failing language is to fail the vessel, failing the body auxiliary. Failing gender is language fatigue, by which I mean, I'm just so fucking tired of this failed system. Gender articulates through the accrual of language, dead pockets full of coins. 6. Close your eyes and dream this with me. Dream yourself bound en masse in flesh and sinew. Find yourself a different way, a better way, a softer kind of undoing. Failing yourself is failing gender, to fail the body complete. Fail your wealth, your sex set debts, declare your body bankrupt, undo your gender with me. 7. Failing gender is not the abolition of gender or money. It is the abolition of essentialism, which is the ideal. This is a framework for questioning power structure, gender, race, class, and creed, deriving satisfaction from their undoing, from your own undoing, which so often are the same thing. 8. Masochism is necessary, like being perverse is necessary, because being a passive body is necessary. We don't need to destroy gender, because gender is so self-defeating, so self-loathing. A muscle memory only of desire suspect. Being a muscle memory is to be debt manifest. Gender can destroy itself. We just need to let our bodies go.
This is a little bit weird. I've never really done my own book launch in person, let alone doing one in the privacy of my own room. And I'm now which probably means I'm going to waffle quite a bit throughout this. And I've now realised that actually seeing this on YouTube Live, you can see a very tiny amount of cat print bedspread in the corner. So we're just going to sit and ignore that bit. Hello, internet people in chat. I'm going to be talking for about 20 minutes, I think, and I'll be reading off a script because there's no chance I can talk for 20 minutes off script without turning into a small anxiety puddle. So I hope this will come off as naturally as possible. Hello, Matthew. System failure, a manifesto for masochism. is a piece of concrete poetry advocating for a queer, intersectional approach to feminism, written from my own perspective as a non-binary trans man. Today, I'm releasing the manifesto as a handmade chapbook. This one. It's a small A6 pamphlet, which I typeset as master spreads on a typewriter and duplicated on a scanner in an edition of 100 copies. I wrote it back in January in response to the highly gendered culture I felt an outsider of while studying. In particular, the difficulty I had in conveying to others that being queer is not necessarily the same as being trans. In its written form, the manifesto is made deliberately illegible, demanding that the reader engage with the text in another way. Where the queer body is concerned, being read can mean being seen, but being seen is not always desired. Sometimes the body just wants to be heard. Its illegibility was also a means of me embodying my own text during its production. I took a great deal of time and care in typesetting it accurately, and when finished, undid this by essentially destroying it, in what I conceived as a masochistic act. Specifically, it was rendered illegible through overprinting, using the same method in which it was typeset. In this sense, the same media undoes that which it creates, and this is the essence of the work. A metaphor for working towards undoing our roles in the social systems we are complicit in, whether this be the gender binary, class privilege, or white supremacy. In the end, though, most are symptomatic of the latter. The pamphlet starts with a short piece of queer theory, in which I find similarities between Judith Butler's idea of undoing gender, and how it's also been written that intimate, masochistic practices involve the doer becoming undone. By writing a manifesto for masochism, what I mean is to suggest that we endure and sit with discomfort with a view to transformative change. I'm going to expand a little on the theory which went into the work. I've become particularly interested in how we get theory out of institutions and into the hands of the people that it talks about. In the manifesto, I say without language, we wouldn't have gender. By this I mean gender is essentially a social construction, and whilst it's a construction articulated through non-linguistic means, it's upheld and perpetuated through the verbal and written language we use to describe it. Collectively, we are so very reluctant to actively allow our languages to change, and this is overwhelmingly clear in the difficulty people claim to have in using the pronoun they, despite it being historically and linguistically correct. The fact that they subverts our binary conditioning shows how it was always language which created it in the first place. I'm a trans man. I prefer male pronouns, but I've no doubt that my preference for them is social and conditioned. I believe if we were not socially conditioned as a particular gender through language, there would remain trans people like myself who feel compelled to change their physical bodies. Sex and gender are not symbiotically linked, but gender is the sticky baggage we attribute to sex. In this sense, I like to think of linguistics as the sex of a thing, and language as its gender. Linguistics, like biological sex, are spherical spectra with parameters, but not polarities or binaries. Language is instead elastic and a medium malleable akin to gender. It has no essential parameters. It can thus be manipulated and antagonized as proxy action for gender subversion. I find language and linguistics used in subversive ways very satisfying, and in the works of others very effective, because for me, it brings to mind a process of energy exchange, heat death, a linguistic ecosystem turning on itself when threatened. At the heart of all supremacies and hierarchies is a language. Words that elevate one can oppress another. Subverting linguistics is like watching the system eat itself out from the inside. Let's try a thought exercise. Think about the word plant. A plant is something which grows from the earth, usually something green, and with leaves. But individual taxonomies can vary. Behind me right now are a selection of plants, a number of which are not grown, but made from plastic. There are those, sorry. I've messed my script up because obviously I was going to do this at some point. So I'll just kind of like wave and gesticulate at them. But here you have the plants, whereas these ones are the plants. Plant, an object or agent secretly placed to invite discord. I wonder what kind of plant am I? They're the free grown plants, and then, by the second definition, the two real plants. I planted my collection here to explain the elasticity of language. In this sense, this whole display is a plant. I don't have this little cohort here specifically for this reason. I'm bad at looking after plants, and the grown ones are still here because I've managed to not kill them yet. You can plant ideas, but what grows from those are neither green nor plastic. Normally, you harvest discord. And then you have an assembly plant. But let's not get into the word assembly. But enough about plants. I imagine I'm just projecting. Toro Moi is a literary theorist who's written of Julia Kristeva's works, having suggested that Kristeva doesn't have a theory of femininity, and even less of femaleness. And what she does have is a theory of marginality, subversion, and dissidence. Insofar as women are defined as marginal by patriarchy, their struggle can be theorized in the same way as any other struggle against a centralized power structure. While writing Manifesto, it became apparent to me I would be doing both myself and society a disservice in recognizing my body as trans only. In addition to being a transsexual body, my body is also white, male passing, and able-bodied. So as I write about the struggle against centralized binary gender, it should better equip me to stand beside others in their struggles against power structures, even when I may be complicit in them. Last year, I was involved in a university project called Unknown Quantities, which is a journal designed and curated between two courses, culture criticism and curation, and graphic communication design. There's two reasons why I'm bringing this up now. One, I believe in line with my manifesto, the right thing for me to do is to acknowledge that GCD's collective lack of Black embodiment resulting in a socially conditioned lack of racial empathy, led us to commission a very small amount of work produced by Black artists and artists of colour. The design team, including myself, went with the position that either all art contributors should be paid the same fee, or none at all. The curation team were of the opposite position, that it was fair for some artists to be paid a fee for their work, and not others. Ultimately, we went with not paying contributors, and as a result, we printed work from those who were able to work for free, or were expected to. And it's clear now that not all content is equal. Free work from studios and established artists does not have the same value as paying creators, whose work comments on identities the West has historically oppressed. And in prioritising our conceptual approach to the journal's production, we neglected a critical examination of who we were commissioning and why. All the design students on the project were white and European, whereas curation were predominantly Black students and students of colour. And this is the second reason I'm talking about this. I think we subconsciously leave the responsibility of elevating non-white voices to non-white communities, inadvertently illustrating a large stumbling block in challenging systematic racism. We often expect those affected by oppressive systems to fix them, when it's not them who should be cleaning up our Western-centric mess. We cannot help but be complicit, but at every opportunity we should resist it. I regret the depth of our complicity, and especially that of my own. Even when I noticed how few artists of colour we were printing, I had the luxury of compartmentalising this in favour of that which cost less emotional energy. It's not comfortable or pleasant to talk about this, and that's why it's necessary. Audre Lorde said, "There's no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not lead single issue lives. For me to demand a decentering of the cisgender voice and not recognise that my body, its transness aside, affords me a comfortable complicity would be duplicitous. Those of us who can move in and out of invisibility have an imperative to be visible when we don't wish to be, in solidarity with those who cannot choose. As a white trans man, I owe a debt to black trans women like Marsha P. Johnson in the same way all civil struggles reach the most vulnerable in society last." I've read a lot of interesting think pieces in the last few weeks about the use of the word ally. And I've often thought how I don't want cis people to be allies, but accomplices in the queer struggle. In the sense of, an accomplice is often condemned in the same way as the accused. An ally can say their piece, share their content, and sink back into invisibility. And many people have said the same of race and class. Asking cisgender society to work towards undoing their privilege over queer and trans communities made me realise how much undoing I have to do myself. As such, all profits from the sale of System Failure will be donated to UK Black Pride, who work to support African, Asian, Middle Eastern, Latin American and Caribbean heritage LGBTQ people based in the UK. The pamphlet's going to be available through Etsy, which I'm going to try, I think I can link to in here at some point. But you can also access it through bodybilingualbooks.co.uk, which I managed to get up and running this morning. Thank you for coming to listen to me yelling into the internet void. I also didn't really plan very well how long I was going to be speaking for, and I'm not sure if I'd get any questions to answer at the end. I wasn't really planning on doing it because I will probably just turn into a small anxiety mess, but if anyone does have any questions, then please feel free to throw them at me. If not, I will sit here for a few minutes and check my phone. Yeah, I can post that somewhere. I can do that through the website I've set up for Body Bilingual. And there's a few different options I can do with it as well on social media, but yeah. Thank you, internet. I'm just referring to like everyone non-descriptionally as internet. Yeah, that's kind of why I set this up as a press as well, because I kind of anticipated that I would have many more projects to work on after this, and it would be sort of one cohesive place to put everything, but also not just for work that I'm producing myself like this, that eventually I'd like it to be well, actually, I explain a bit of this in the About section of the website as well, which is that I'd want it to be a platform where I can also publish other voices that kind of in some way couldn't be or would find it difficult to be published elsewhere because people find them marginal. And I always rely on Matthew to ask good questions. Also, as a little piece of end information, if anyone decides to start making books or pamphlets on a typewriter, like this one, if you decide that you're going to do justified text, and make all your little text blocks nice and neat and pleasant, and somehow pleasant to look at. And we're not quite sure why it's pleasant to look at, just because it's all nice and neat and aligned. It will take you a very long time, and you will hate everything by the end of it. Yes, I can link my social things in here. And then on Body Bilingual Books as well, that will link out to, there's a link to Instagram, there's a link to my Etsy page, which I'm selling them at the moment, because with only having like a couple of things, it wasn't very economically sensible to set up a whole new store on something like Cargo or Squarespace when I'm just doing a few at the moment. And it will also link to a SoundCloud page where you can listen to Manifesto as well. And I've noticed that Jane Rapley's also left a comment as well. And I think it's also fair to say that pretty much everything that I've achieved over the last few months has been very much down to receiving the scholarship a couple of months ago. Because as a result of that, I was able to reduce my hours at work, which left me more time to painstakingly obsess over justifying text that didn't need to be justified, and spend a lot of time in a letterpress workshop. But this is all kind of going on a little bit now. I wasn't really going to mention this now at all, but I've just noticed that she's left a comment, which is very nice, very welcomed. If that's it for all our questions, and I've actually realized this is really weird because I'm sort of essentially talking to myself, which is nice from an anxiety point of view, but is very weird as a social point of view. Although it's great if we can do more things like this, it'd be great. Yeah, I think that's kind of initially the idea that I had when I was doing it. I originally typeset this in letterpress, but I wasn't able to finish all the pamphlets that I'd got planned before we had to all lock ourselves down, which was why I changed it to a typewriter. But there was a sense of there's so many ways that you can fail in printing. Yeah, and I mean, it depends what you kind of describe as a mistake as well, because letterpress particularly is a very like organic metabolic process. And so it means that you always kind of embrace the little mistakes. And I mean, in a way, the typewriter was a little bit more satisfying to use than this in letterpress, because that was, I ended up correcting so many typing errors as well. Just like little things like, I think Helen Ingham's favourite ones were me writing Judith Butler and the word Wemery. But those things are like, they're mistakes, and then you correct them, and there's no real evidence of it in the final thing. Like the way I was printing it before, I was taking my spreads and then hammering back over them on the printing press, but you kind of don't see any memory of the previous mistakes that were made. And there was something about doing it on a typewriter that you could kind of sort of see where these were, that it's kind of a little bit more imperfect because you create one master copy and then take many from that, whereas with letterpress you're taking multiple original copies. And I mean, they have sort of different benefits in both ways. But where this idea of failure came from as well was Jack Halberstam's book, The Queer Art of Failure, where they talk about that actually being queer and existing outside of the gender binary is kind of a form of liberating failure in itself. So that's kind of where it came from as well, and sort of how do we embrace failure as actually being a good thing, because very rarely like good things come out of doing something right the first time. And I think I've kind of started clinging onto that an awful lot, because I cook an awful lot, and the amount of mistakes I make in that if I don't embrace failure and think, oh well, I've learned from this, then I would just start throwing pans around the kitchen. Actually, cooking's a very good thing to like, and it's when you're talking about like learning through failure as well. But I'm not going to start talking about cooking now. And yeah, I think we don't really know when failure's right at all, and I think you don't know immediately as well, because I think it's only ever something that you can look back on in hindsight and then think how you learned from something. Like, for example, I'm very pleased with how my work turned out, specifically as a result of having to do it from home and completely change the media I used for it. But at the time when we went into lockdown, I didn't have access to workshops. I was in that much of a state of panic that I bet that for about the first 4 weeks of lockdown and during the Easter break, I basically had a breakdown, and I'm still on antidepressants because of it. And so it's a case of that, in a lot of people's minds, might be construed as quite a considerable failure, but kind of all those things were able to lead to then what I'm able to do now. And I know that this doesn't apply to everyone who's in this situation. It's just how you can only ever look back on whether you failed in a right. Well, no, you can't really. Anyway, this is a big open-ended question that I could also go on about for a very long period of time. And I've successfully managed to just about fill the half hour that I thought I was going to talk for. So in that sense, this hasn't been a failure, and that's quite disappointing, I think. And I've also realised that whenever I write comments, it just comes up that I'm writing with central marking. But I suppose that's fine. But I do want to send, like, I will send a happy face because it's degree show day, yay! And I would drink a lot of cider to celebrate this, but I'm in work at 9 AM. So I probably shouldn't, but I'll send a nice little happy face to you all. Yeah, and if it's all right with everyone, I think I'll call it a day. And hopefully make sure that I actually save this to the page, right, because I've been practicing all day how to save a video, and I'm now waffling, and this has nothing to do with the actual talk. So bye everyone.